Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to our main character. End of part 1. It had only been a few weeks since Ethan and Ava made their agreement. At first, it seemed like the perfect solution to both of their problems. Ava's personal issues would stay under wraps, and Ethan would continue to keep his carefully constructed public image intact. No one suspected a thing. They played their parts flawlessly, and everything seemed to be going according to plan. But the more time they spent together, the harder it became to maintain the boundaries they had set. It started with small things, longer glances, unexpected moments of laughter, and an increasing number of private conversations that had nothing to do with the contract. Ava noticed it first. She began to realize how often she thought about him when he wasn't around. At work, she caught herself smiling when he walked into the room or when their hands brushed ever so slightly while passing papers. She tried to push those feelings aside, telling herself that it was just part of the act. But deep down, she knew she was lying to herself. Ethan, on the other hand, was even more conflicted. He had promised himself that he wouldn't get emotionally involved. He was the one who had suggested the arrangement in the first place, and he had been so careful to keep things strictly professional. Yet, every time he saw Ava's smile or heard the way her voice softened when they spoke, it became harder and harder to pretend that he didn't care. The line between fake and real was beginning to blur, and the worst part was, he didn't know how to stop it. One afternoon, they were sitting together in his office, reviewing the details of an upcoming merger. The company was expanding rapidly, and Ethan's mind was consumed with work. But as they discussed numbers, his focus kept shifting to her. Ava's brow furrowed in concentration, the way she leaned over the desk to point something out to him. She was so close. Her perfume lingered in the air, and for a moment, he could feel his heartbeat quicken. He quickly looked away, trying to shake the feeling. Ava didn't notice. She was too wrapped up in the deal. But Ethan could see the way her eyes flicked to him now and then, almost as if she were searching for something, maybe even the same thing he was looking for. It wasn't until the meeting ended that either of them spoke a word about it. They both knew that this was dangerous territory. This wasn't supposed to happen. But here they were, two people who were supposed to be faking it, yet somehow, they were both beginning to feel something real. As the days passed, their interactions grew more complicated. At the office, it was business as usual. They met with clients, signed contracts, and ran the company together, partners in every sense of the word, except for the personal connection that was slowly developing between them. But outside of work, things began to change. One evening, Ethan invited Ava to dinner under the pretense of discussing some new investments. They met at a quiet, upscale restaurant, a place where no one would recognize them. The conversation started off normal, discussing business deals and the future of the company, but soon, it took a more personal turn. Ava talked about her past, her childhood, her family, the dreams she had before life got in the way. Ethan listened intently, his gaze never leaving her face as she spoke. There was a softness in her voice that made him want to protect her, something he had never expected to feel. The more he listened, the more he found himself wanting to know everything about her. He couldn't remember the last time he had been so interested in someone, especially someone he barely knew. As the night wore on, the conversation became less about business and more about them. And for the first time since their agreement, it felt like they weren't playing a part anymore. It felt like they were just two people, sharing a moment. By the time dinner ended, the mood had shifted. They were no longer two people pretending to be something they weren't. The walls had come down, and they were left facing something they both had tried so hard to avoid: real feelings. As they walked to their cars, neither of them said much. The silence between them was filled with an unspoken understanding. When Ava got into her car, she stared at the steering wheel for a long time, her thoughts racing. She had been trying so hard to keep everything under control, to keep her emotions in check. But she had failed. She couldn't deny it anymore. She was falling for Ethan. And the worst part was, she didn't know how to stop it. The next day, at work, things felt different. There was a tension in the air, something neither of them could ignore. Their interactions were still professional, but there was an underlying layer of something else, a mix of desire, confusion, and a little bit of fear. Ava kept telling herself it was just a phase, that the feelings would pass. But she wasn't sure she believed that anymore. Ethan, too, was struggling. He could see the change in her, the way she looked at him now, the way her smile didn't quite reach her eyes anymore. He wanted to reach out, to tell her that he felt the same, but he couldn't. Not yet. The contract was still in place. They had agreed on the terms. They had to keep their distance. But deep down, he knew the truth. It was already too late. The fake had become real. And neither of them could go back. The next few days were filled with a tension neither Ethan nor Ava could ignore. They were walking a thin line, balancing between professionalism and the growing feelings they were both trying desperately to suppress. Ethan had always been in control of his emotions, his actions calculated, measured. But now, every time Ava entered a room, it felt like his resolve was being tested. Her smile, the way she spoke to him, everything about her seemed to draw him in, closer and closer. He couldn't afford to be distracted. Not now. Not when so much was at stake. Ava, on the other hand, was torn. She had convinced herself that their arrangement was temporary. That it was just a business deal, nothing more. But every moment she spent with Ethan made it harder to believe that. She had started to feel something for him, something real. The more they interacted, the more she found herself wanting to be with him, not because of the contract, but because she genuinely enjoyed his company. But she also knew she couldn't cross that line. Not only would it ruin the deal, but it would also jeopardize everything she had worked for. It was a Saturday afternoon when everything changed. Ethan called her, asking if she wanted to meet up. He said it was for work, to go over some documents. But when they met at his office, he could tell there was something different about her. She seemed distant, distracted. It wasn't like Ava to be so closed off, especially not with him. He watched her as she sifted through the papers in front of her, avoiding his gaze. Finally, he broke the silence. "Ava, what's going on?" She looked up at him, her eyes betraying a hint of vulnerability. "I'm fine," she said, but her voice didn't match her words. He knew something was wrong. "Ava, you're not fine. You've been distant. I can tell something's bothering you." She hesitated, then sighed. "It's just, everything is getting too complicated. I don't know what's real anymore." The contract, the fake relationship, it's all starting to feel too real. Ethan felt a tightness in his chest. I get it. I feel the same way. Her eyes widened in surprise. You do? He nodded, his gaze unwavering. This was supposed to be temporary. But it's not just a contract anymore. I can't pretend like I don't care about you. Ava's heart skipped a beat. She had known deep down that he felt something, but hearing him admit it out loud sent a rush of emotions through her. She had to fight the urge to give in, to let herself fall into the moment. Ethan, we can't, this was never supposed to be real. It was just supposed to be a way to solve our problems, to keep things simple. I know, he said quietly. But what if it's not that simple anymore? What if this is something more than we thought? Ava stared at him, her mind racing. She wanted to believe him. Wanted to believe that what they had was real, that they weren't just pretending anymore. But she knew the risks. If they let their emotions take over, everything they had worked for would fall apart. I don't know if we can keep doing this, Ethan. I don't know if I can keep pretending. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence between them was heavy, charged with unspoken words. Finally, Ethan broke the stillness. What if we don't have to pretend anymore? What if we make a choice, right here, right now? Ava's breath caught in her throat. She knew what he was asking. But could she take that leap? Could she let herself fall for him, knowing how much was at stake? I'm not asking you to make a decision now, he said softly. I need you to know that I'm not playing a game. I never was. I care about you, Ava. And I think you care about me too. We don't have to keep pretending. We can figure this out, together. Ava felt a wave of emotions crash over her. She had never been one to let her guard down, especially not with someone like Ethan. But in that moment, with the sincerity in his voice and the longing in his eyes, she realized how much she had already let him in. How much she had already fallen. She took a deep breath, her mind still spinning. I don't know what this means for us, or what happens next. But I do know that I don't want to lose you. Ethan's expression softened, and for the first time since they had made their arrangement, the weight of the contract didn't feel so heavy. In fact, for the first time, he felt lighter. We won't lose each other, he said, his voice filled with a quiet conviction. But even as he said the words, neither of them knew what the future held. The truth was, their lives were about to change in ways they hadn't prepared for. The line between fake and real had already blurred, and there was no going back. Ava wasn't sure where this was headed, but one thing was certain, she was no longer just playing a part. Neither of them was. They were walking a path they hadn't planned on, one filled with uncertainty, but also with the promise of something real. And as much as it scared her, Ava couldn't help but feel that it was the first time in a long time that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The next few days felt like a whirlwind for both Ethan and Ava. What had started as a simple contract, a mutual agreement to keep up appearances, had evolved into something neither of them had expected. The emotional walls they had both carefully constructed began to crack, little by little. They had crossed a line, and there was no turning back now. At the office, their interactions became more subtle, yet the tension between them was palpable. A stolen glance here, a brief touch there, small moments that would have seemed insignificant to anyone else but carried a weight that only they understood. Ethan found it harder and harder to keep his feelings in check. Every time he saw Ava, something inside him pulled at him, urging him to admit what he was already feeling. But he still had the business to focus on, the empire he had built from the ground up. He couldn't afford distractions. Ava, too, struggled with the growing affection she had for Ethan. She had always prided herself on her ability to keep her emotions in check, but with him, it was different. Every time he smiled at her, every time their eyes met, she felt a flutter in her chest. It was becoming harder to convince herself that this was just a business arrangement. She had tried to keep her distance, to remind herself of the boundaries they had set, but the truth was, she was falling for him. It was late one evening when the inevitable happened. Ethan invited her to his penthouse to discuss some company matters. She had been to his place a few times before, but this time felt different. There was an air of uncertainty, an undercurrent of emotions neither of them could ignore. As soon as Ava walked in, she could feel the change. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation. Ethan stood by the window, looking out at the city below, his back to her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. It was as if they were both waiting for the other to make the first move, to break the silence that had grown between them. Finally, Ethan turned to face her. "I've been thinking about what we talked about the other day," he said quietly. "About us. About what this is becoming." Ava's heart skipped a beat. She had known this conversation was coming. She had felt it in the way he looked at her, in the way their interactions had changed. But hearing him say it out loud made everything feel more real. "I don't want to pretend anymore, Ava," he continued, his voice low, but firm. "I don't want to keep hiding behind this contract. I don't want to keep pretending that I don't care about you." Ava felt a rush of emotions flood over her. She had known for a while now how she felt about him, but hearing him admit it made her chest tighten. She had wanted this, wanted him, but it terrified her. The contract, the business, everything they had built, it all felt like it was slipping through her fingers. "I don't know what this means for us," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "I don't know if we can just change everything. We made a deal. We set boundaries. What if we ruin everything?" Ethan stepped closer to her, his eyes softening. "Maybe the deal was never the real issue. Maybe it's just that we've been trying so hard to control something that was never meant to be controlled. Maybe we're not supposed to be pretending anymore." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence was thick with the weight of their unspoken feelings. Ava looked into Ethan's eyes, searching for some sign that this was more than just words, more than just the heat of the moment. And when she saw it, when she saw the sincerity in his gaze, she knew that he was right. "I don't want to pretend anymore either," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I'm scared, Ethan. I don't know how to navigate this. I don't know how to fix this without everything falling apart." Ethan reached out and gently cupped her face in his hands. "We don't have to fix anything, Ava. We just have to stop pretending. We're already in this together, whether we like it or not. The only thing left is to decide what comes next." The room was silent for a long moment, and for the first time, they both felt the weight of the decision ahead of them. It wasn't just about the contract anymore, or about the business. It was about them, about what they meant to each other. And for the first time since their arrangement had started, it felt like they were truly on the same page. Ava took a deep breath and slowly nodded. "Okay. Let's stop pretending." Ethan's eyes softened as he leaned in, slowly closing the distance between them. He kissed her gently, a kiss that was no longer a facade, no longer a part of some agreement. It was real. And as they pulled away, both of them knew that nothing would ever be the same again. They had crossed a line, and there was no going back. They were no longer just two people playing a part, they were two people in love, and that changed everything. The days that followed were a whirlwind for Ethan and Ava. The kiss they had shared that night was a turning point, one neither of them had expected but both knew was inevitable. What had started as a business arrangement, a contract to cover up personal lives and maintain control, had evolved into something far more complex. They had crossed the line between fake and real, and neither of them knew how to go back to the way things were. At work, things became more difficult to navigate. They still had their roles to play, their public personas to uphold. They couldn't let anyone suspect that their arrangement had changed, that their feelings for each other were now real. But it was impossible to ignore what was happening between them. Every time they were near each other, there was a magnetic pull, a silent understanding that had never been there before. They were no longer pretending to be a couple, they were a couple. But the question was, could they keep this secret, or would it destroy everything they had worked so hard to build? Ava tried to focus on her work, but it was becoming harder and harder to concentrate. Her thoughts kept drifting back to Ethan, to the way he looked at her when he thought no one was watching, to the warmth of his touch. She had never expected to feel this way, not about him, not about anyone. She had always been in control of her emotions, had always kept her distance. But now, she felt like she was losing control. Ethan, too, was struggling. He had built his empire on control, on keeping things under wraps. But the more time he spent with Ava, the harder it became to keep his emotions in check. He had never allowed anyone to get close to him like this before, never let anyone see beyond the surface. But Ava had wormed her way into his heart, and now he couldn't get her out. It wasn't just about attraction, it was about something deeper, something he had never experienced. One evening, as they sat together at the office after hours, reviewing some final details on an important deal, the air between them felt charged, heavy with unspoken words. Ethan looked at Ava, his gaze lingering a little longer than usual. "We need to talk," he said, his voice steady but serious. Ava looked up from her paperwork, meeting his eyes. "About what?" she asked, her voice betraying a hint of nervousness. Ethan took a deep breath. "About us. About what's happening between us." Ava's heart raced. She had known this conversation was coming, had known it was only a matter of time before they would have to face the reality of what had developed between them. "Ethan, we can't," she started, but he held up a hand to stop her. "No. Let me say this. I know what we agreed on. I know we set boundaries. But the truth is, I don't want to keep pretending anymore. I don't want to hide what we have." Ava's mind was spinning. "But everything we've worked for, the company, the deal, our reputation, it all could fall apart if people find out. If we let this go public, if anyone knows the truth," her voice trailed off, filled with the weight of the consequences. Ethan's eyes softened. "I get it, Ava. I do. But I can't pretend this is just a business arrangement anymore. I care about you. I care about what we're building together. I'm not going to let fear dictate my life, not anymore." Ava swallowed hard, the words hitting her like a wave. She wanted to say the same thing, wanted to tell him that she felt the same way, but the reality of the situation kept her from speaking. She had worked so hard to get to where she was, and the idea of losing it all terrified her. I'm scared, Ethan, she confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm scared that if we give in to this, if we make it real, it will destroy everything. Ethan reached across the desk, his hand resting over hers. His touch was warm, grounding her, giving her a sense of calm that she didn't know she needed. Ava, you're the strongest person I know. And I know you've worked hard for everything you have. But I don't think we need to choose between this, he motioned between them, and everything else. We can figure this out together. She looked at him, searching his face for any hint of doubt, but there was none. His eyes were filled with sincerity, with a confidence she had never seen before. For the first time, she believed him. You really think so? She asked, her voice cracking slightly. Ethan nodded, his hand tightening around hers. I do. I'm not saying it will be easy. Nothing worth having ever is. But we've already made it this far. I think we can make it work, Ava. The silence between them was heavy, but it was a different kind of silence now. It was full of possibilities, full of hope. And for the first time in weeks, Ava felt a sense of relief wash over her. She didn't have to choose between her career and her heart. She could have both. It wouldn't be easy, but nothing worth it ever was. And she was willing to fight for this, for them. With a deep breath, she nodded. Okay. Let's do this. Together. Ethan smiled, and for the first time since this whole journey began, everything felt right. He leaned in, brushing a kiss across her forehead, a simple gesture that felt more intimate than anything they had shared before. They didn't know what the future held, but in that moment, they knew one thing for certain, they were in this together. And that was all they needed. The decision had been made. Ethan and Ava had chosen each other. Now, all that was left was to face the consequences of their choice. At first, things felt easy. They had each other's support, and that made everything seem possible. They could handle the pressure, they convinced themselves. Together, they could conquer anything. But the real world wasn't so forgiving. As their relationship became more public, the challenges started piling up. The first hurdle came in the form of their colleagues. Whispers began to circulate around the office. Ethan, the ever-quiet, composed CEO, was suddenly much more animated, much more human. And Ava, the rising star in the company, was now linked to him in a way no one could have predicted. Rumors spread fast, and the corporate world, especially the one they were in, had a way of making everything personal feel very public. At first, neither of them paid much attention to the gossip. They were focused on the work they were doing together, and that was all that mattered. But then came the investors. Some of them were questioning the dynamics between Ethan and Ava. They had known Ethan to be a man of control, of clear boundaries, someone who didn't let emotions cloud his judgment. And now, with Ava in the picture, they were wondering if that would change. The tension between them was growing, and it wasn't just the pressure of managing the company anymore. It was the pressure of managing their relationship in the spotlight. The constant scrutiny. Ava found herself increasingly exhausted. She had worked so hard to get to this point in her career, and now it felt like every move she made was being analyzed. There were moments when she wondered if she had made the right choice. Could she balance her personal life with the demands of her career? Could they really keep this hidden while making their relationship work? Ethan, too, was starting to feel the strain. His empire was at risk, not because of the work they were doing, but because of the perception people were starting to have about him. He had always kept his personal life separate from his business. That was the key to his success. But now, Ava was a part of both, and it made him feel exposed, vulnerable in a way he had never felt before. And yet, when he looked at her, he knew there was no turning back. They had come this far, and despite the pressure, he didn't want to lose her. One evening, after a particularly tense meeting with their board of directors, they found themselves in his office, the door closed, the air thick with unspoken words. Ava was standing by the window, staring out at the city lights below. Ethan watched her for a long moment, not knowing what to say. Finally, he broke the silence. "Ava, I know this hasn't been easy. But I need you to know. I'm not backing down from this. From us. I care about you. I've always cared about you." Ava turned to face him, her eyes searching his face. "I know, Ethan. I care about you too. But the pressure. It's getting to me. I feel like I'm drowning in it. The company, the rumors, everything." Ethan crossed the room to stand beside her. He placed a hand on her shoulder, a reassuring touch. "We knew this wouldn't be easy. But we have each other. And that's more than most people have. We're going to figure this out, I promise you." Ava looked up at him, her face softening. "But how? How do we keep this from falling apart?" Ethan took a deep breath, trying to find the right words. "We take it one step at a time. We don't let the world dictate what we do or how we feel. We're in this together, Ava. We don't have to hide anymore. Not from each other, not from anyone." She nodded slowly, her fingers curling around his hand. "Together," she repeated softly. The weight of the situation wasn't gone, not by any means. There were still obstacles to face, still challenges ahead. But for the first time in a long time, Ava felt a sense of peace. It wasn't going to be easy, but with Ethan by her side, she believed they could weather the storm. The next day, they faced the board of directors again. This time, they stood together, facing the scrutiny with a united front. Ethan was calm, composed as always, but there was a new confidence in his demeanor. And Ava, standing beside him, felt stronger than ever before. They were no longer just the CEO and the rising star. They were a team. They were partners. And no matter what anyone thought or said, they were going to make this work. The world might try to tear them down, but together, they were unstoppable. The following weeks were filled with a mix of triumphs and challenges. Ethan and Ava had become even more solid as a team, both in their personal relationship and in the company. The pressure from their colleagues and investors hadn't disappeared, but it was becoming easier to ignore. They had each other, and that was all that mattered. Or so they told themselves. In the boardroom, they were a force to be reckoned with. The once whispering investors now watched with newfound respect as Ethan and Ava presented their latest business strategies. They were no longer just a couple playing a part. They were partners, equals. And as much as they had feared the public eye, they had found strength in facing it together. But away from the boardroom, it was different. The tension in their relationship was growing, and neither of them could deny it. As much as they were building something incredible in the company, their personal lives were beginning to unravel in ways they hadn't anticipated. They couldn't deny the depth of their feelings for each other, but the realities of their situation were becoming more complex. Late one evening, after a long day of meetings, Ethan and Ava found themselves sitting across from each other in his office, the city lights glowing softly outside the window. The weight of the day hung heavy in the air, but it was more than that. There was something else, something unspoken between them. Ethan could see it in her eyes, the way her gaze kept flicking to him before quickly turning away. He knew something was wrong. "Ava," he said softly, his voice breaking the silence. "Talk to me. What's going on?" Ava looked at him, her expression a mix of frustration and uncertainty. "It's just, everything. The company is growing faster than we expected, and I feel like we're both getting pulled in different directions. I don't want to lose you, Ethan, but I'm starting to feel like I'm losing myself." The words hit him harder than he had expected. He hadn't realized how much she had been struggling with the balance. "Ava," he whispered, moving closer to her. "You won't lose me. I promise. But I need you to be honest with me. What do you need?" She hesitated, the weight of her thoughts pressing down on her. "I need to know that we can make this work. Not just the company, not just the relationship. But everything. I need to know that you and I can survive this, no matter what happens. I need to know that we can build something real, something that lasts." Ethan took a deep breath, his heart heavy with the realization of just how much was at stake. He had always been focused on the business, but now, more than ever, he knew that what they were building together, personally and professionally, was what mattered most. "Ava, we can make this work. Together, we're unstoppable. And I'm not just talking about the company. I'm talking about us. You and me. We've come this far, and I believe in us. I believe in what we can build, not just for the company, but for ourselves. But I need you to trust me." Ava looked at him, her eyes searching his face for any sign of doubt. But there was none. She saw only sincerity, only the man she had come to love, the man who had become her partner in every sense of the word. Slowly, she nodded. "I trust you," she whispered. "I trust you with everything." Ethan leaned in, brushing his lips against hers in a soft, tender kiss. It wasn't a kiss of passion or urgency, but one of understanding, of reassurance. They had a long road ahead of them, and neither of them knew what the future would bring, but in that moment, they both knew that they could face it, as long as they faced it together. The world outside may have been unpredictable, but together, they had found something real. And that, in the end, was all they needed. As time passed, Ethan and Ava began to find a rhythm that worked for them. Their personal and professional lives started to align in ways they hadn't thought possible. The company was flourishing, and they were becoming a powerhouse team, both in the boardroom and in their relationship. There were still moments of stress and uncertainty, but they faced them together, their bond growing stronger with each challenge they overcame. Yet, despite their growing success, a new challenge began to surface. The more they built together, the more they realized how high the stakes had become. Their relationship, once a private escape from the pressures of the corporate world, was now something that had to be managed carefully. It wasn't just about the company anymore, it was about their future. As their love for each other deepened, so did their fears of losing it all. One evening, as they sat together at dinner, the conversation took a more serious turn. Ava was quiet, her fork pushing around her food absent-mindedly. Ethan watched her closely, sensing that something was weighing on her mind. "Ava," he said softly, breaking the silence. "What's going on? You've been quiet all evening." She looked up at him, her eyes tired. "I'm just thinking, Ethan. We've come so far, but I can't shake the feeling that things are changing. We're changing. And sometimes I wonder if we're losing ourselves in all of this. Ethan's heart tightened. He knew exactly what she meant. It was a feeling he had been having too, but he had been too afraid to admit it. I feel it too, he confessed, his voice low. But I don't want to lose you, Ava. I don't want this to be just about the business or the money or the success. I want us to be real. I want to keep what we have, what we've built, for ourselves. Ava nodded slowly, her gaze fixed on his. I don't want to lose that either. But sometimes, it feels like we're so wrapped up in everything else, we forget to focus on us. On what really matters. The weight of her words hung in the air, and for the first time in a long while, Ethan felt vulnerable. He had always been the one to keep everything in control, to have a plan, to make sure nothing could go wrong. But now, he realized that no plan could account for the emotional complexity of their situation. So what do we do? He asked quietly. Ava took a deep breath, her fingers gently tracing the edge of her wine glass. We slow down, she said finally. We take a step back and remember why we're doing all of this. Not just for the company, not just for the future, but for us. We need to reconnect with what brought us together in the first place. We can't keep moving at this pace and expect it to work. We need to make time for each other, Ethan. Real time. Not just the moments between meetings and deals. Ethan's heart softened at her words. She was right. They had been so caught up in the whirlwind of their lives that they had forgotten to take a step back and just be with each other. You're right, he said softly, reaching for her hand across the table. I've been so focused on everything else that I forgot what really matters. Let's take it slow. Let's find a way to make this work without losing ourselves in the process. Ava smiled, a small but genuine smile, and squeezed his hand. Together, she whispered. And in that moment, they both knew that no matter how hard things got, no matter how high the stakes, they were in it together. They had built something real, something worth fighting for. The future was still uncertain, but one thing was clear, they had each other, and that was more than enough. In the months that followed, Ethan and Ava found themselves in a place they had never been before, a place of balance. They had slowed down, as Ava had suggested, and it made all the difference. Their relationship became the solid foundation they had always dreamed of, a source of strength rather than a source of stress. The company continued to thrive, but now, it wasn't the only thing that mattered. They had found a way to juggle both, understanding that success didn't mean sacrificing their connection. Ethan had learned to let go of some of his control, allowing space for spontaneity and moments of joy with Ava. He had always been so focused on the future, but now, he appreciated the present, those quiet moments where it was just the two of them, with no meetings or deadlines to worry about. Ava, too, found a new sense of calm. The anxiety that had once kept her up at night, worrying about the balance between work and love, began to fade. She no longer felt like she was constantly at war with herself. Her career was still important to her, but she realized that it wasn't the only thing that defined her. She had Ethan, and with him, she had everything she needed. They took weekends away, small trips that allowed them to reconnect, and in those moments, they remembered why they had started this journey together. They rediscovered the magic that had brought them together in the first place, the laughter, the warmth, the undeniable chemistry. The future, though still unpredictable, no longer felt daunting. Together, they knew they could face whatever came their way. It was no longer about just surviving, it was about thriving, as a couple and as individuals. And with every challenge they overcame, their love grew stronger, more resilient. One evening, as they stood together on the balcony of their apartment, overlooking the city that had once felt so overwhelming, Ethan turned to Ava, a soft smile playing on his lips. "We've come a long way, haven't we?" he said, his voice filled with contentment. Ava leaned into him, her hand finding his. "We have. And it feels right. It feels real. You and me. Together," Ethan whispered, his voice full of certainty. Ava smiled, resting her head against his chest. "Together," she echoed. In that moment, they knew that no matter what happened next, they had built something real. Something that would last. And that was all that truly mattered.